I mean, does anyone say no to this?
Absolutely.
Yes. I'm not going to say no.
I believe access is what I'm hearing you say. So access to opportunities, yes.
It's a fundamental necessity to preserve democracy.
In school systems that don't give them the same opportunities as school systems that have really nice educational programs, and they're at a disadvantage.
Yeah, I think so.
But I think when they enter the building, it would be nice if they had as much of an equitable experience as possible.
I can't imagine someone going into education who didn't believe that every person deserves a high-quality education.
So feeling safe, being able to take whatever courses they're able to based on their prerequisites, things like that.
Is this a yes or no question?
I think location has a lot to do with it.
Well, like, in the way people, like, settle in, like, neighborhoods, like, I know on the south side there's a lot more, like, African-American people and stuff. Yeah.
Are you, no, actually I don't know. I don't know enough to comment intelligently on how CPS is segregated, though I know that it is.
If you have a better neighborhood, you're going to have a better school. If you have a neighborhood that's not so good, the population there in terms of taxes, everything that's needed to run the schools is really dependent on the location.
Schools in the city are often underfunded.
If you live in a certain neighborhood, you're bound to have like a certain education, you're bound to hang out with a certain crowd, and that definitely affects your opportunities for the future. And that kind of limits like what goals you will have in life.
In 1987, the U.S. Secretary of Education declared Chicago's education system to be the worst in the nation. It still is today. Injustice in the education system continues to violate the Chicago citizens' right to a fair and equal education. It is a responsibility of these citizens to be aware and demand change, while the Chicago School Board is responsible for creating equal educational opportunities for everyone. In June of 2007, the parents involved in Community Schools versus Seattle School District case arose in the Supreme Court. The outcome of this case, using race as a factor to assign individuals to certain schools, is against the Constitution. 5 years later, the New York Times ranked Chicago schools as the most segregated, with 48.5% of Chicago black students attending full minority enrollment schools. WBEZ 91.5, a Chicago radio station, published the research they conducted that same year. They found that the number of Chicago public schools that consist of 90% or more blacks have increased in the last 20 years. Hispanics are also becoming a part of this trend. Their schools rose from 26 to 84. On the other hand, schools where no race makes up 50% or more of the student body have dropped from 106 to 66 in the last 20 years. Predominantly white schools have also dropped. According to WBEZ, Chicago Public School declined to comment on the findings at the time. So why are Chicago public schools still pretty segregated 5 years after the parents involved case? Well, the racial demographics of the city play a huge role. Just last year, UIC created a GIF showing the trend of race majority in various regions. Starts from the US Census of 1910 up until 2000. A key of the map will be redrawn here. Pay close attention to the yellow, purple, and red. As it starts nearing to the year 2000, there is a large patch of red in southern Chicago. Patches of yellow also begin to sprout. On the other hand, purple grows slowly. From 2005 to 2009, that same area of highly concentrated black remains unchanged. The same applies to 2010. That concentrated area of blacks we saw on the maps previously is called the ghetto. The ghetto goes way back to the 1960s, where we saw the increase in black population. The ghetto got its name due to high rates of poverty at the time. The conditions of the apartments and houses were awful. Many families were crammed in apartments and homes. They had to share bathrooms, there was no heating, and there were reports of rat infestations. The apartments and houses weren't even built with safe materials. Many children died from lead poisoning. The landlords weren't nice to the families and often ignored the problems. And sadly, redlining was a huge issue during this time. To redline is to withhold home loan funds or insurance from neighborhoods considered poor. That's what Mayor Richard Daley did. He created several housing projects to persuade blacks to stay in the area, but they didn't work. In 1965, the Coordinating Council of Community Organizations joined forces with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and Martin Luther King Jr. to start the Chicago Freedom Movement, which demanded to end slums and create equal housing opportunities for everyone. King launched a 2-month campaign in the summer of 1966 protesting and marching in all-white neighborhoods. He inspired blacks not to pay their rent. King also placed on Chicago's City Hall door a list of demands that would encourage integration of housing. The freedom movement caught the eyes of the mayor, the Chicago Real Estate Board, and other city leaders, so they all met up to discuss the problems. This summit negotiations agreement was reached, and there was hope there would finally be fairness and equality at last. Sadly, the negotiations were never carried out. The movement failed. Today, the ghetto still hasn't had much improvement. As much as blacks may want to move out, it's super hard to do that, mainly because everyone there is practically living in poverty. The Chicago Area Fair Housing Alliance published a report in October 2013 that summarized how poverty affected school segregation in recent years. The report stated that blacks lost 27% of their net wealth, and Hispanics have lost 41% of it. It was all due to foreclosures and disinvestments. The report also said that gentrification played a role too. In the 1990s, CPS and the Chicago Housing Authority worked with local business leaders like real estate to transform public housing into neighborhoods that would attract wealthier residents, in hopes of integrating races. Those who lived in public housing received housing choice vouchers, which allowed families to rent homes in the private market. However, this plan failed since many of the families with HCVs had limited options in the private market and were forced to stay in the ghetto. This next map shows the income rates in 2010 in different areas of Chicago. The lighter areas represent the lowest income of $10,000 to $20,000. To no surprise, this light area is the south side where we see this. With the majority of blacks and poverty rates all concentrated in one location, it's clear how school segregation still exists. Research shows a higher house income increases the likelihood for parents to expand education options for their kids, and most would choose private schools. But because many blacks and Hispanics don't have high incomes, they must resort to public schools. Not just any public school in Chicago though. They are forced to choose schools within their neighborhood. For decades, the Chicago Board has failed to promote integration in Chicago public schools. In the early 1960s, Superintendent Benjamin Willis employed Willis wagons, mobile classrooms, to relieve the overcrowded black schools. The plan had little to no effect because classrooms were still overcrowded, sadly. However, the CCCO staged boycotts like Freedom Day, encouraging blacks to skip school. On Freedom Day, thousands marched to the Chicago Board of Education office to protest against unfair school policies, but the board does little in response to the demand of the people. In 1976, the state board threatened Dr. Hannon, the superintendent at the time, to submit an integration plan. Thus, the city-wide advisory committee was formed. The CWAC wrote up 2 plans, but Dr. Hannon ultimately submitted his own plan to the state board. His plan, Access to Excellence, was harshly criticized by the Technical Assistance Committee, a subdivision of the state board. Access to Excellence was approved in 1979 after several changes, but as the TAC has predicted, it failed. Another plan was put into action in 1983 after the Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare, Patricia Roberts Harris, threatened CPS again. This plan also failed. The failed plans contributed to CPS's financial problems today, worsening the segregation issue in public schools. Sylvia Puente, Executive Director of the Latino Policy Reform, and Phyllis Lockett, CEO of the New Schools for Chicago, both believe that racially isolated schools aren't much of an issue as long as equal educational opportunities are given to both. But if CPS, blacks, and Hispanics are both struggling with their finances, that's not going to happen anytime soon. In fact, not even teachers are evenly distributed among the schools. Experienced teachers are more likely to teach at wealthier or diversified schools. This leaves the not-so-experienced teachers to teach at poorer schools, and those happen to be racially segregated. Teachers tended to report student absenteeism and misbehavior of students at poor schools more than financially stable schools, which is why those experienced teachers stay away from those schools. But why does this happen? According to the 1966 Coleman Report, it concluded that the poverty of school was indirectly proportional to student motivation, engagement, and achievement. Meaning if schools were poorer, students were less likely to be motivated for success in school. For the 2013 to 2014 school year, the Chicago Board voted to shut down 41 schools to relieve a deficit of $1 billion. Most of the schools are schools in the South Side. 100 people gathered at Mary Emanuel's house on Independence Day to protest against this decision. A month before this, the Chicago students organizing to save our schools fought against these budget cuts at the city's Board of Education meeting. People are afraid that these closings will force other schools to become overcrowded. Since most of the ex-students are black, they will most likely go to other poor schools in the area, causing more overcrowding. According to a study conducted by the University of Chicago in 2009, when the board closed 18 schools, 82% of the students went from those underperforming schools to other underperforming schools. The CAFHA fears that this will only deepen segregation. In the 14th Amendment, the Equal Protection Clause guarantees equal protection to all people under the law, and no state has the power to deny equal protection to anyone. In Chicago, public schools aren't equal. Progress has been made in the past, but now things have regressed, and that needs to stop. Raising awareness is the biggest factor that can influence the future. Organizations like Links and Chicago Students Organizing to Save Our Schools have already done so much in demanding equality. Even the 2012 teacher strike was a huge step towards awareness. Now it is time to step up the game. There are always the occasional people who started from the bottom, now we're here, but we want everyone to get the education they deserve. It's time to be aware and show the board that segregation is only hurting everyone in some way. As King once said, nothing in the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity.
We are the ones who make a brighter day, so let's start